Good afternoon, friends. A hearty welcome to all of you at the Bangalore Tech Summit 2020 for the German session today on e-mobility, moving into the future, being organized by the German Consulate in Bangalore in association with the German Engineering Federation, VDMA. Proud privilege for me to welcome Mr. Achim Burkhardt, the Consul General of the Federal Republic of Germany in Bangalore, and all our esteemed panelists. We would like to assure you that all safety protocols have been duly followed and temperature checks of all the participants, panelists have been done. As the COVID-19 crisis rages, it is perhaps for the first time in modern history that demand, supply and workforce altogether have been impacted, and not only in one region but throughout the globe. Due to this, the year 2020 will go down in history as the Black Swan year. Like most of the industries, automotive OEMs and players within the mobility industry have also been impacted. Over the long term, COVID-19 could have a lasting effect on mobility as it drives change in the macroeconomic environment, regulatory trends, technology, and consumer behaviors. The trends may vary from region to region. Hence, responses and outcome for mobility players will also differ by location. In recent years, electric vehicles are getting a fair bit of attention in India, thanks to the efforts on part of the government and industry stakeholders in promoting zero-emission electric vehicles as pragmatic solutions to sustainability issues facing conventional mobility systems in the country. With the domestic industry dominated by 2- and 3-wheelers that are relatively easier to electrify and push electric mobility amongst the masses, the opportunities for EVs and their localized development in the country is immense. As per a recent report launched by the financial services firm Avendus Capital, taking into consideration the present and projected level of EV penetration, it is expected the electric vehicle in India could represent a 500 billion opportunity by 2025. Over the past decade, the economics of the technology used in EV sector has improved significantly. And today, EVs make economic sense across multiple use cases. The inevitability of transition to EVs is accepted by the world. However, the timeline for mass adoption is still a topic for debate. The Indian government's plans to acquire lithium mines in Bolivia, Argentina and Chile show the long-term focus of transition to EVs. Further, while the Indian government has benefited from the fall in oil prices during the pandemic, these prices are likely to bounce back in the post-COVID world. Friends, today with our esteemed panelists representing leading German companies in Karnataka, along with a promising startup, we would discuss the e-mobility market in India and the way forward. However, it is a proud privilege for me to first invite our Consul General, Mr. Achim Burkhardt, for his welcome address.
Thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to welcome you wholeheartedly to the German session on e-mobility at the Bangalore Tech Summit 2020. We are here today only virtually, but I believe that Corona will go away, and I really hope, sincerely hope, that we all will meet after COVID in the analog world to sit together to discuss all these questions further in detail. Indeed, I believe that e-mobility is a very crucial topic. It is a crucial topic because it's about our common future. It's about the sustainable world, it's about climate change. It's absolutely necessary that we actively change and shape that future. I believe that climate change is real. There are some people around that planet which don't believe it, but I think the majority does. Science is doing it, and we can see it all over by more catastrophes, etc., etc. So we have to do something, and e-mobility is one particular point where we can do something. It's a man-made climate change, so we can change it also as human beings. If we want to change something, we have proven our ability to do so. We can do that in the transport sector. If you look at transport, it's very dear to us. is actually at the center of innovation. It's at the center of our economy. For thousands of years, transport of goods and people has been the number one driver of the economy. And if you look at the number one invention of it, it's the wheel. It's still a good invention nowadays. And look at my country, at Germany. A very big part of our economy is based on transport in all its facets. And I don't talk about cars only. It's not about building a new fancy car with new technology. It's about much more. It's about ships, it's about planes, it's about railways, it's about two-wheelers and three-wheelers actually, and so on and so on. So there is a lot to innovate in e-mobility, and we have to set the trend for the future. We have to set the trend for sustainable ways of transportation. So I believe that at BENGALURU Tech Summit 2020, it's very timely to meet and talk and discuss e-mobility. Germany and India, we do have an impressive track record in common research and development. We are very close and we are strategic partners in this project. Together, we can do a lot and we can foster that technology and we can be a game changer. So I'm glad to sit together with so many high-ranking panelists on this podium. These are so knowledgeable, much more knowledgeable than I am in this topic. Again, I would like to thank you for being here, listening and watching to us, and I'm looking forward to see all of you in a post-COVID time. Until then, please stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burkhardt, for your address and setting also the tone for our discussion today. Friends, to draw on the experience of leading companies, we have a unique format of our panel discussion. In fact, we will have the panel discussion in 2 rounds today. And for the first round, it's the esteemed panelists who have joined us, Mr. Pankaj Vyas, CEO and MD, Siemens Technology and Services Private Limited. Welcome to you, Pankaj.
Thank you for having me.
Then we have Mr. Dattatreya Salgame, MD, Robert Bosch Engineering and Business Solutions Private Limited. Welcome to you, Dattatreya.
Thank you. My pleasure, Rajesh.
And joining us is also Mr. Manu Saleh, MD and CEO, Mercedes-Benz Research and Development India Private Limited. Pleasure to have you with us, Manu.
Thank you, Rajesh.
Pankaj, let me start with you. Electric vehicles are on course to fulfill their promises as a game changer for the automotive industry. Now, how do you assess the future of e-mobility in India when we look at, let's say, at a time frame of the next 5 years by 2025? And which of these segments, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, passenger vehicles, or public transport, will be the first adopters? And which segment would be the laggards, Pankaj?
Sure. That's a very pertinent question. I mean, thanks for bringing up that, Rajesh. I think the answer lies in understanding what are the impacting factors which will really affect the adoptability of the e-mobility, right? One is really the range, the predictability of the route, and then the infrastructure to support these 2 elements, right? Now, if you look at the range and route, the vehicles that operate within the certain periphery of a city or metro, right? That's a smaller range kind of commute that you're looking at, right? And they have lesser challenges to look for putting up a charging infrastructure for vehicles like those. Those are definitely going to take the lead. I mean, if you look at some of the statistics and reports available, we already have close to 1.5 million e-rickshaws, right? Like three-wheelers. Alone in 2019, if I'm not wrong, we have sold more than 100,000 two-wheelers, electric two-wheelers, right? So these vehicles definitely are going to get the lead ahead because the providing infrastructure within the city. These are not the vehicles which would be struggling with too much of range anxiety, if I have to say that, right? The other set of vehicles within the city which would operate are the basically public transport buses, if you look at, right? There's a predictability of a route there. They always are going to move on a certain route, and then you can really have a very well-planned infrastructure to support this movement over there, right? The third category within the city, if you look at, is going to be the kind of the trucks or the vehicles which support maintenance of a city, be it a garbage waste pickup or supplying certain kind of essentials, and they again move on a predictable route within the city, and they can be supported very well. So this section of a vehicle will definitely take the lead. But now if you look at the intercity vehicles, right, the one which have to do the long haul, be it the buses or the trucks which really carry the heavy loads, I think that's where a lot of work would be required in terms of having infrastructure on these corridors, right? It cannot be a straightforward solution of putting bigger and heavier batteries on these vehicles, and that kind of defeats the purpose, right? And these vehicles will have to really go a long way. So there are a lot of interesting solutions are at play here. There's one that I'm coming across, which I find may have a great potential here, is the e-highway, right? I mean, you could really use the electric road systems, and vehicles could get charged while they're driving, right, while they're being driven. So in a lot of high traffic corridors, right, you could really put in this dynamic conductive or inductive way of charging and let these vehicles be charged while they're driven. But then that still means there's a lot of work to be done, and this would be, I think, towards the end of the radar, but what gets kind of electrified. So clearly the vehicles which move within the smaller range in a predictable route within the metro and city would definitely move forward. Short summary, like two-wheelers, three-wheelers, smaller passenger vehicles, and even the buses that do the public transport. And the long hauls are the ones which would take a little bit longer as the infrastructure develops for them. That's kind of a view I think is going to emerge over here.
Right.
Yeah.
And where do you see also, Pankaj, for the passenger vehicles, also within the city, you feel
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, if you see, this has really come a long way, right? I mean, if you had asked this question about 5 years back, range anxiety was a big problem. But if you see more and more launches are being done with advancements in the lithium-ion battery technology, you can get up to maybe 300-kilometer range. I mean, of course, Indian traffic will have its own challenges compared to where it's compared, but still definitely passenger vehicles would take the lead compared to, again, long-haul distance vehicles here.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for these inputs, Pankaj. Let me come to you, Dattatreya. Dattatreya, what we've seen in India is actually the policy initiatives. The government's efforts have been the main driver for the e-mobility. So in your opinion, Dattatreya, maybe two important policy initiatives that can really give a boost to e-mobility in India.
That's a good, very relevant question, Rajesh, because government has a big role to play here. E-mobility, because we have invested capacity in conventional vehicles. So the switch has to be a transition. So it is not a overnight switch from conventional vehicles to electric vehicle. So how can government facilitate a smooth transition from all the OEMs and the component manufacturers from today's invested capacity to electric vehicles? So government has done a lot. If you look at it has done a lot in last 10 years, but sometimes doing a lot too often is also a challenge. So I think government has realized now that the policies need to be stable, consistent, which will give a clear roadmap for industries to invest. Because electric vehicle is a long haul game. So as Pankaj said, that's a reason why the two-wheelers and three-wheelers have higher propensity to adopt EVs. So looking at FAME, for example, as a policy, which was launched in India quite some time back, the FAME 1 is over, now we have FAME 2, and FAME 2 is valid till 2022. I'm sure government will have a discussion with the industry and extend it. I honestly feel it needs to be extended in a format that is conducive. So FAME 2 is very relevant because it addresses both supply side and demand side policies. Right. So the subsidies and incentives both on the supply side, on the demand side. So you get rebates if you're buying electric vehicle. On the supply side, you get benefits if you're establishing manufacturing plants. So that's a good vehicle to foster electric vehicle adoption. But it needs a little bit of a tweak. For example, now we are talking about one of the biggest issue in electric vehicle is the uptime cost. So upfront cost is high because the battery cost is more than 30 to 40% of the vehicle. So now government is talking about decoupling battery and selling the vehicle without the battery. Vehicle can be registered without the battery. Now, how would FAME 2 regulation take care of this? Because there are a lot of subsidies which are related to battery. There's the size of the battery, the wattage of the battery. So how can FAME2 adapt to the new segment where you decouple the battery? So these are the things which government needs to look at when you rejig FAME2 for after 2022.
Right. And coming to that, I think that's one of the concerns of the industry is also when the battery is decoupled, then the OEM, his responsibility, because he doesn't know what sort of battery will come into place. So I think that is going to be one of the concerns.
So that is going to be a dynamics which is going to play out between the OEs and the policymakers.
Right.
So and hence I say when you look at some of these policies, you need a very close dialogue between the industries and the government.
Right.
I think the wave 1 and wave 2 of policy is very good. For example, EESL created tenders to kickstart the adoption of EV in government sector. That's a good start for the whole industry. But to keep the momentum on, you need a more pragmatic dialogue.
Right. And I think here also that with the state governments, we have seen various incentives coming from the state government. So I think center and state together, perhaps this would help to boost.
Absolutely, that's a very good point. If you see, the state governments are sometimes very enthusiastic about this. So keeping aside what kind of governments are there, if you see recently Tamil Nadu announced tax benefits, Telangana has announced subsidies for setting up of battery units. Karnataka government, if you recollect, Karnataka was very early in electric vehicles.
They were one of the first to come out with
first
the
electric vehicle
policy.
Came out of Karnataka. If you look at the Reva came out of Bangalore. Right. So Karnataka has a history of promoting this. So you can go further. For example, subsidies on removing toll for electric vehicles, special parking facilities, charging at subsidized rates. So some of these things can push that option.
Right.
Thank you. Just to add a comment here, I really agree with what we just talked about here, right? I think rather than having a piecemeal approach on different aspects of e-mobility, I believe the need is to look this as an overall ecosystem that needs to be developed, right? Right from being manufacturing, charging infrastructure, and the overall digital infrastructure to support different commercial aspects that may come out, right? A lot of new services would come out of it, right? I think a need for an overall ecosystem approach for e-mobility would really help us rather than kind of doing first part and then second part. It's like cars are done now, you wait for infrastructure. Right. That's going to hurt this thing.
Right. Thank you. Coming to you, Manu, we are representing here the German industry, and so when we talk about e-mobility, Manu, where do you see the potential of Indo-German collaboration? And also another question is, do you think that there is going to be sort of a project-based alliance in R&D work or development that is happening in the e-vehicle sector? So do you see more alliances happening here, Manu?
First of all, good afternoon, and thank you, Bangalore Tech Summit and the Consulate VDMA for inviting all of us. Very, very pertinent question again, because I think there are few countries in the world that are actually pushing the electric agenda more than the others, be it on government support, on simply public awareness, societal awareness, and Germany is certainly top of the list there. And in our context, therefore, very relevant that the Indo-German collaboration should play a major role, from technology to inspiration to policy making to component development to R&D. As a German company working out of India, we see umpteen possibilities for these two countries to come together and for both to benefit out of the electric, whole push behind the electric. Let's take the example of Mercedes and the Ambition 2039, as we called it. The aim of the company to provide complete carbon neutral mobility to its customers. And we believe luxury customers will be forerunners. They'd like to show the world how much they care for the cause and be happy to adopt. We were happy to launch the EQC recently here in India, one of our first from the electric stables with a bigger range and a solid construction. That kind of paves the way for a lot between the two countries to start collaborating, first of all, on everything electric, right? Automotive space has already opened the gates between the two countries. We have been seeing a huge supply base for German automotive industry out of India, conventional already. There's a lot of R&D, and my colleagues sitting here next to me from Bosch or Siemens or Mercedes, all large teams that are sharing development responsibilities for global products, and we see no reason why this doesn't continue into electric. In fact, probably even stronger simply because of the digital nature of services, what Pankaj spoke about, or business in general that's hovering around the whole electric mobility framework. So first part of the answer, I think there's an even stronger possibility for Germany and India to collaborate under the umbrella of electric, and Germany certainly has leading the way and showing the way in several ways. Challenges, of course, will be, like you just heard from the two colleagues on the panel, India will have its unique use case. If Germany's mode of transport and form of mobility is very different, its road network is different, and Pankaj was counting numbers of two-wheelers and three-wheelers, which is probably not a use case that Germany sees. So from that perspective, we need to tweak technology. So there's a lot of engineering that's involved in simply translating a bigger vision of electric to a country like India. Last known, probably we're talking still less than 1,000 charging stations in this country, compared to a vast network that's already laid out in Germany, for example. And it just starts there. There's so much more to say about it. That's where I think there's a strong possibility for both of us to collaborate.
Thank you, Manu. Mr. Bokhard, coming to you. In India, we are seeing that actually the push for e-mobility is through the government policies and government initiatives. Would you let us know about Germany? Is it similar that the German government is pushing the e-mobility in Germany, or it is more the industry initiatives?
You know, that question I can answer very clearly with a clear yes and a clear no. You know, because somehow, if you look at that particular field, you have to have both in the driver's seat. You do have the government, and I think the panelists already mentioned the governments as being one part of the driver's seat. But you know, I'm a public servant. I don't invent anything. You know, I can do something on the framework. I can support you, businesses, etc. But that is something which is only one part of the equation. The other part of the equation, are the businesses, and you are the guys who are doing the job. You know, so any government can set things, etc. If they are not well done, if we don't make the environment sound for business to work in, then nothing will happen, because you won't make a business case out of it. So I think this close cooperation is very important. Secondly, there's one point which I want to elaborate on. I think a government has a big role to play when it comes to setting a trend or setting a tone. And that's what my government did, and from the highest top. And I think that is very important. It was the Chancellor Angela Merkel who stood in front of the German people and the German businesses saying, we want until 2020 1 million e-cars in Germany and a sound and well-functioning infrastructure for loading capacity. If that will happen due to COVID, I'm not sure about it. So there is perhaps a backlog on it. But anyhow, I think setting a target is something important, because then people know where things are going to. So that is one point. And there's a second point I would like to elaborate on. Already some time back, the German government, and I have to read that because it's a long name, they put up the German National Platform and Electric Mobility, NPE. So that is a kind of a two-way street in order to bring all aspects of e-mobility on the table. And you were mentioning about it, you know, there is so much you have to think about it around e-mobility in terms of services, in terms of even, you know, legal questions. You know, what is happening, for example, if an e-mobile self-driving vehicle is having an accident? So we don't perhaps have these kind of answers yet. So the government has to give answers to that. And I think this kind of platform we have created together with business, together with universities, together with other stakeholders in society, is quite a unique thing. So thank you, Manu, for saying that Germany is quite far in doing that. Sometimes, you know, if I read our newspapers, I say everybody's complaining about that it's not going quick enough, you know. But I think you're right. We already did a good work on that, and I think we still have to develop. So again, a clear yes and a clear no on it. It's businesses together with the government and other stakeholders in order to make the process going.
Right. And I think that is very essential also. Yes, Manu. Yeah.
Now, if I just want to add to what Akim said, I think there's another layer other than the government and business that I want to add to that answer, and that's especially with electric societal adoption,
Yes.
which plays out very differently in different countries, right? If I may say that, the German government says a little bit, and the German public, whose environmental consciousness plays a role, a big role. If you see it play out in China quite differently, I think for the viewers today, it's to take back and see how should that whole thing play out in India, right? If you've been used to driving conventional for a long time, hopefully caring also what goes out of your tailpipe and how the whole thing from wheel to well is actually working, and each one of us turns very conscious about saving this part of the planet, and then tries to adopt new forms of mobility, cleaner forms of mobility. I think the adoption is going to be different, faster, more acceptable, and anxieties, not only about range, about cost, and all that the panelists spoke about, can be dealt with in case the society reacts to green mobility much better.
Right.
And I think we'll have our own set of challenges doing it here.
Absolutely. I think a very valid point. Dattatreya, when we look at India, in fact, we are presently, most of the critical components for e-mobility vehicles are being imported. Now with the government trying to restructure the imports, and we are talking about self-reliant, Atmanirbhar Bharat. So how would that impact the development of e-mobility in India?
Extremely valid question for a country like India. So if you move from conventional vehicle to e-mobility with a view that you decouple yourself from oil imports,
right,
but you could end up importing lithium-ion cells.
Right.
So it's no different, right?
Right.
So because we don't have lithium-ion reserves,
right,
I think we can make some steady start. So can we say we stop imports and we yet succeed in e-mobility in 1 year? Answer is no. So but we can figure out where this is possible. If you look at a classical e-mobility, you have a motor, and you have a cell, and you have a battery, and there's a lot of power electronics. So India has been good, and of course there is a lot of software. As Pankaj and Manu mentioned, if you have to create the digital ecosystem, there is a lot of software needed around it. So we could start with power electronics. India is good at power electronics, so we can be self-reliant to large extent in power electronics piece of it. The cells itself, we would not be. We may have to still import cells, but the battery pack assembly, the battery management system, many of this can be in a phased manner done out of India. So because there is capability here, only what you need is to upgrade this capability to the automotive standards.
right,
If you see even the motor manufacturing, if government can help the motor manufacturers to upgrade to the automotive safety standards and reliability standards, so some of them can actually transition into the space of e-mobility. So these are short-term possibilities.
right,
While in the longer horizon, we may have to still look at having our research on the cell chemistry itself.
right,
So we may have to focus on what is the right cell chemistry which makes India self-reliant.
right,
Is it the classical lithium-ion battery that we are looking at today, or is it another cell chemistry that is which is relevant for India? So that is something which we need to work out. The other aspect is, as my co-panelists mentioned, India needs a lot of hyper-local solutions.
right,
The very unique market, the temperatures, dust, road conditions, and whatnot. You may have to have architectures which are localized for India,
right,
and many of these things would be based on software.
right,
So software-led architectures,
right,
and India has enough capability to do this.
right,
So sometimes when we think of Atmanirbhar, we forget the fact that future products will be led by software.
Right.
And India is a powerhouse of software. And as you see, I think three of us, we may be developing multi-million codes of software into different kinds of vehicles around the world.
Right.
So this piece also can be done completely out of India.
Right.
And I think if the state pushes for public-private partnership, especially on the charging infrastructure, and bring more players into the game, I think a lot could be done out of that.
Right. I think very valid points and very insightful. Manu, let's just go further, one step further. Dattatreya spoke about Indian conditions. So of course our country is unique, temperatures rising up to 50 degrees. It's quite a challenge. Our road conditions are not the best, even when we see around, especially monsoon, post-monsoon. So when we talk about the development of e-vehicles, do you think for the Indian conditions, with these temperature, road conditions, these would have to have it would be a little different for the Indian conditions, Manu?
Well, you bring out the engineering, right? I think partly, I'll take off from where Datta stopped with the software-driven discussions, right? An electric car is already the first place where all of us see the possibility to define the car by software or define the performance by software.
Right.
And there's a lot that's meant behind it. If you take the EQC, for example, and I'll come to the question of how, for example, it works under an Indian condition.
Right.
There's an NEDC cycle for electric, just like you had a test cycle for the internal combustions. And we say under test conditions, it's designed with its battery, lithium ion, for about a 400 plus kilometer range, right? We launched it in India. And if you drive the car, what it does for you right now, if you put your leg on the gas pedal, accelerator pedal, it gives you a haptic feedback, the EQC, at a place where software tells you, for the given conditions that you mentioned, may not be dust, but slope, road, speed, traffic, temperature, loads on the battery like HVAC that would probably be belting out more cold air in a 50-degree Rajasthan for you. What's an optimum place where you can keep it pressed? More than that is suboptimal. You don't even have to see the dashboard. The haptic feedback on the gas pedal tells you, stay there, because you maximize the performance of your car for whatever mode you've selected at that point, right? So software already kind of, now it has an impact on range, there's no doubt about it. So it had on diesel or gasoline, right? You would get more or less mileage under Indian conditions because of exactly those conditions that you mentioned, or environmental conditions that you mentioned. We just make it more software defined, more software driven, and hopefully taking away range anxiety, but giving even more control on the driver's hand to say, at that point, we give you a feedback, human enough for you to feel, if I drive this, I get the max range out of this right now, or the greenest way to drive right now, right? So this is just one example, taking from where he left, to say software can overcome or assist in some cases those conditions that you meant challenging, right? In the country.
So it must be quite an interesting work happening at Mercedes.
Well, very actually. I mean, our global CEO says the car is going to be a software product on wheels, and I think you just saw the panelists echo with different words the same sentiment. And if you have a chance to keep that car, in this case powertrain electric, but also connected, autonomous, whatever it is, more software driven, refreshing it more often at the customer end, in our context today, fixing, adding new features, and getting the last juice of the electric available even after you buy the car. This is going to define the mobility of the future.
But perhaps I might chip in, because Manu, you were talking about the society and the acceptance of the society of e-mobility. And I think the software question is a very important one, because my country, we are very sensitive in terms of data protection, because you get an enormous, big data pool which you get out of your cars as information. What is the driver doing? How is he driving? Where is he going? Etc. etc. So I think this is a point where we have to make clear in the whole process that the data protection is to be very strict and very clear and very, very visible also for the consumer. That is, I think, an important point, because otherwise people would tend not to use these kind of features.
Right.
Agree.
Yeah. The last question perhaps for this round, coming to you, Pankaj, let's move from technology to more society-driven. So we are seeing rapid urbanization happening, Pankaj, and it's almost that I think the urban population is expected to increase to about 60%. Mobility as a service is a concept that should pick up. Where do you see mobility as a service having a role in India? And do you feel that this could also be developed in India, Pankaj?
Absolutely. I mean, if you really think mobility as a service, I think this is a significant element of digital transformation. In a way, society will make decisions on what mode of mobility I should be using, right? That's one part, right? And for that to happen, first need is to really bring multi-mode of transports on a single platform. What I mean is platform, digital platform, right? And once you have that, then users get to see what can be done with that, and as we talked about, a lot of use cases can emerge, right? Then users get to see, hey, look, should I be going from point A to B because this is the lowest cost, and if I use this multiple modes of transport? Second, I could say, depending on day of time, if I use this combination, then this is faster, right? I mean, like mornings, maybe metros are crowded and they're not in the afternoons. That's the second one. Third one could be, where's my convenience and comfort? You know, if I need some privacy, I'm going to be doing some calls while I'm traveling. I don't want shared stuff, right? My time that is going to be used during traveling, then I'm going to choose something else. Fourth one could be, which is really about the environmental consciousness that you talked about, Manu, right? What's the carbon footprint of my commute here, right? What is it going to cause here, right? Am I going to be making it a greener commute, or am I going to be making it kind of, creating more harm to the planet with this commute, right? So I think once you have those options, then people will start thinking about it. You can definitely incentivize some of those options to make sure that people move more towards cleaner way of things, more shared commute and things like those. So definitely that's going to happen. But for that to happen, clearly, I think there are again 4 elements here, right? Which I think is case. One is vehicles have to be connected, right? Connectivity, and it's happening, right? Then you talk about autonomous, so that there's more predictability and things like those. For more optimal use of the fleets that you have, then it's about shared. That's S part of it. And then you come to the carbon neutrality, which is kind of related to shared, but then it's electric, right? So if you put this together, then you really have amazing platform in play, and you can give a lot of options for people to make choices what are right for them, and then you kind of slowly change the choice pattern of a society, which is going to kind of drive towards cleaner country, cleaner planet. I think it can play a significant role. I mean, just look at an example. 10 years back, all we had to do was step out and look for an auto or a taxi. That's what we did. Today we have mobile application. I can go to look for my Ubers and Olas and whatnots, right? It's happening. So I think we have started. Now it's really about bringing these things together on a certain platform. Will take us there. We already have connectivity in place. I don't think that's our challenge today with everything happening, right? It's really, as Akeem will to talk about, government can do so much, but a lot of invention needs to come from the businesses out there. Absolutely. And that's what opens up a lot of use cases out there. I think e-mobility and this mobility as a service could really be one of those things for automotive industry, which was cellular for the telecom. I mean, today if you see the penetration of the automotive is still a long way to go. Right. And the sooner we adopt all of these things that we just talked about throughout last 30 minutes, we will have a much better country and in terms of all the aspects that we talked about. But the late we go in that, then we'll have too much transition to work on. So I think mobility as a service, as a platform, can play a significant role in what we talked about here.
Right. Excellent, excellent, Pankaj. I think that sums up it very well, and I would like to thank our panelists. I think we had a very interesting discussion covering topics of policy, market penetration, technology, mobility as a solution, and also thanks, Akim, for giving us the perspective from the German point of view also. So thank you very much, panelists, for this insightful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So friends, after an insightful and informative first round, it's a pleasure for me to welcome our esteemed panelists for for the second round of discussion. And we have amongst us Mr. Vinay Shenoy, Managing Director of Infineon Technologies, Mr. Hubert Rylad, German Technology Consultant, and Mr. Ranjan Kumar, co-founder of DriveBuddy AI, and of course our Consul General, Mr. Akim Bokhat, is joining us also for this session. So a hearty welcome to all of you esteemed panelists. My first question to Vinay. Vinay, if we look at a 10-year roadmap for the electric vehicle industry in India, where do you see the development of the electric vehicle industry in 10 years' time? And also the role of the government, Vinay, central government as well as the state government. For example, let's look at Karnataka. What role do you anticipate for the state government if we have to promote e-mobility here in the state of Karnataka?
Rajesh, thank you. Interesting question. But first of all, good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be back again at BENGALURU Tech Summit, the 2020 edition. If I have to speak about a story, if I have to do a back to the future, looking back 10 years, I would say India has a phenomenal opportunity to disrupt the conventional landscape of EV and the roadmap of EV. Now, why do I say that? Let's look at unsung heroes of EV in this country at this point in time. A relatively unorganized sector, which is the e-rickshaw market, which was conventionally people who peddled people back to work or home, that has gone electric. And this is not a small scale adoption. We have 3 to 4 million e-rickshaws that are serving the last mile connectivity from the metro as a metro feeder. Now that silent revolution is not being spoken about, but we should be proud as a country that this adoption has taken place. And the ecosystem is also pretty well developed, whether it's assembling the electric motors and the battery, which is today old technology lead acid, serves about 60-70 kilometers, and is providing good livelihood or even a better livelihood for these operators than they were able to conventionally do, because their average speed was 15 kilometers when they were pedaling, and now they're able to go up to 30 kilometers and carry many more people, and hence they make more money. So there is a fundamental business case for that group of people, and that is where the adoption has been very high. You don't need to sell. They're not looking for subsidies, but there is a fundamental business case already. So I think that has been disruptive. We don't see this in any other country in the world, except maybe China or some other South Asian countries, but not on this scale. I think that is a starting point for our journey, where the starting point is different from where most other countries begin. The second, I would say, looking back, public transportation in this country. Many people still live off public transportation, and these are government run mostly. And when the government has to promote adoption, I would say government should start by adopting themselves where they're in control. And one of the speakers earlier in the panel discussion mentioned that they follow a standard circuit with depots and bus stops, etc. So providing either charging infrastructure, or what I believe is also pertinent for India, battery swapping technology will become very manageable, and hence the adoption can be much better. So the government has to play the role model game. Third, the others who have to see a return on investment. We have tremendous number of rickshaws which are from the organized sector. I think that will be the next to adopt. Again there, if you go back 15 years in time, when there was a transformation from fuel run, highly polluting rickshaws to gas based, CNG based, that adoption has been very successful. Now why was that adoption very successful? Because people did not have to invest a lot of money, the rickshaw operators. So you provide them a very easy transition path to CNG system. And you didn't have to fill up CNG at gas stations. You could swap the cylinders, if you see. And these cylinders were available in many parts of the city. So that adoption was very successful. So we're proving that these transitions can be successfully managed in the country. Now, we'll have to look at why and how those models have been made successful and adopted for EV. I definitely think for rickshaws, we can also adopt similarly. Then I think two-wheelers, which are primarily circuiting within the city, so range anxiety does not exist, will be the next one to move towards EV. And then I would say LCV, the light commercial vehicles that ply within the city for the city deliveries. Right. And only then, maybe my fellow panelists may not agree or may not like it, but I think in my view, if I have to look back, the passenger vehicle segment and the luxury vehicle segment will adopt. Right. Because there you are talking about individuals, right, and that is the tragedy of the commons, where people say, I would like to benefit from the environment, but I don't want to be the first one to contribute to the environment. So this societal challenge that we face will also apply to this one. And since the inherent cost is very high, I think that will be the last to adopt. So that's on my storyline, if I have to sketch some chapters.
Very interesting.
Now, the policy-wise, I said one, the government has to lead from the front. There are enough investments that the government makes in transportation. Start with that, number one. Number two, provide a marginal compensation to those operators who are running vehicles as a business, whether it's the shared mobility guys, whether it's two-wheeler or four-wheeler, or even taxi operators. They find a deficit in their business case when they switch to EV. So if the government can bridge the deficit, this is what happened in the solar industry. When government invited tenders for solar installations, they provided the bridge funding. So if the solar investment takes 16 rupees to generate 1 kilowatt of energy, but government has to sell it at 5 rupees or 6 rupees, 11 rupees deficit was made for the by the government to the private operator. Right. And that's how it kick-started. Now it's of course cheaper than what you can generate with coal. Yeah. But that learning curve is very important. Right. So I think the government also has to look at how to incentivize the industry, not the consumers, but the industry to start adopting. And when people around them see electric mobility being widely adopted, I think that's when they make the switch. So government incentives, but that's more the nudging factor. I would not say that's going to disrupt people from or industries from moving from conventional to electric industry. Right. So I think these two predominantly, one is incentives, lead by example, and thirdly I would say develop an ecosystem locally. We are still far too dependent, whether it's for batteries, besides the final assembly of the battery, chemistry of the battery, charging infrastructure, power electronics, motor control. We have industries here, but they have not found it easy to transform to the electric vehicle technology domain. I think here the government has to really say, let's make it in India, and we can make it in India.
Right. I think very valid points, Vinay, and especially, I think as you correctly mentioned, the whole ecosystem still needs to be developed in India. But a very interesting point what you raised, and I would like to come to Hubert with that. Hubert, we are a price-sensitive country where I think the cost determines the decision rather than the comfort or the environmental concerns. So as a consumer, Hubert, if I were to ask you, what premium would you be ready to pay for an e-vehicle?
For an e-vehicle.
Right.
Yeah, your question, Rajesh, come at the right time, because we had indeed a family discussion.
Okay.
Several rounds indeed, whether we need a new car or not. And okay, the decision is we don't need a new car right now. We will wait for 2 years. But for the first time, electrical vehicle was in the race.
Right.
So we went around in the market and we developed 3-4 criteria whether we would go for an electric vehicle or not. The first question is a good one available? And we were extremely surprised. There are very nice vehicles already in the market.
Right.
So it starts with our old champion from Karnataka, Reva.
Right.
That was in a range of 9 to 11 lakhs.
Right.
Then we had Tata, Nexon, 15 to 17 lakhs. MG, 20 to 23 lakhs. And then we had Hyundai, Kona, around 25 lakhs. Okay. So I feel, first of all, the performance of the vehicle, everything we saw was excellent. All these vehicles were fun to drive. And also they had a lot, my son liked it, even so he would go for the Mercedes in this. But the features in these cars are enormous. So the first criteria is, are there good vehicles? Yes, you have a good selection of vehicles. Then the second criteria was the reach of these vehicles. Mm-hmm. So what we saw, what they say in the brochure is around 300 kilometers to 450. Maybe you have to deduct a little bit when you use AC and things like that. So we would like a little bit more, but for the city, of course, this is enough. And if I would go with the family, let's say to Bandipur, maybe around 400 kilometers, It would be a border case. So then let's say we would stop in Mysore overnight. And you would charge the vehicle in the hotel. So you can charge this vehicle overnight with a single 230 volt connection, 15 amps.
Okay.
So that gives you around 3 kilowatt per hour. And for example, the Tata has a 30 kilowatt motor. So in 10 hours it's charged. And then the next day you go to Bandipur. On the way back, if you don't want to stay again in Mysore, then you would need a fast charging station. So they would charge with much faster, maybe in 1 hour. These stations are on the way to Bandipur, not available yet. So we hope in the near future they have more and more. And if the number of vehicles increases, they need also more and more so that you can get it. But for the time being, I say even if you go a little far range, if you want to, you can make the arrangements. You have to inform the hotel that they have a connection for you, and then I think you can do it. So that criteria, I think, is also, and if we wait 2-3 years, I think it may be 500 kilometer, 550. So that is also not critical anymore. I mean, and you came to the price, what we said, we would pay around 1/3 more than for the conventional one.
Okay.
That is a little bit environment, but also a little bit calculation, because we would assume the maintenance cost in an electrical vehicle is much lower. I mean, an engine, electrical engine needs normally not much maintenance. So 1/3. And if you look, for example, I take the Nexon as a sample. If I want the same feature in the electrical vehicle, in the diesel or petrol, it comes to around 9 lakhs. And the electrical one is around 15.
Okay.
So it's not so far away from 1/3 if you take that as a criteria. So I think it will be also, the more people go for it, it will be commercially viable. So overall, we have not, to be frank, 100% decided, but I think everything is going in a positive direction. The price is going in a positive direction. The good vehicles are available, that is positive. And then charging will become, of course, an issue, let's say later on, if you have 50 kilowatt stations to charge. If you have 20 vehicles, that is 1 megawatt. You need a huge infrastructure to cope with that. But if there is a will, there is a way, as we say in Germany. So I'm pretty sure if the society and also the political responsible people are serious about this way, it is also economically viable. And that, so to answer your question, we would pay a little more, and it will be commercially successful, I'm convinced. The last criteria you may allow me to mention is that also came from my son again. He would ask, where is the energy coming from in the charging station?
That's a very important point.
So let's say if that is all from coal-fired power plants, we don't gain that much.
Right.
Because then you pollute the environment somewhere else, not with your vehicle in the city, but somewhere else. I'm not saying we can get rid of all coal-fired plants in the near future, but we can make them much better. That is the first step, and then we can replace it with other energies. So the power for an electric vehicle over a period of time should not come from coal. Then the purpose gets lost to some degree. Finally, I would love an electrical vehicle because I'm an electric engineer. So one day I have to try it. Whether it's a little more or less, I have to do it.
Interesting points and interesting thoughts, but thank you. Friends, I would just like to, at this juncture, share some statistics with you. As per a recent study done by Deloitte, 53% of the respondents were willing to pay a premium of less than 1 lakh for the electric vehicle. 21% were willing to pay between 1 lakh to 3 lakhs. And 14% were willing to pay more than 3 lakhs. And it was only 12% who were not willing to pay anything extra for the electric vehicle. So if we look at these figures also, a majority of the people are willing to pay a premium for electric vehicles. Ranjan, let me come to you. When we look at traditional manufacturing of vehicles. So we have the OEMs, you have the suppliers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. Whereas when we are talking about e-vehicles, we are seeing the whole system has changed. In fact, these are basically technology companies. If you look at Tesla, they are basically technology companies who are also manufacturing or making vehicles. So the complete ecosystem would change when we talk about the e-vehicle. What's your take on this?
So I think a lot of responsibility has been taken by startups and the smaller companies. And in fact, in India, I would say startups were the companies who actually got the EV into limelight, right? And same goes with the world also, right? Tesla's, Faraday Futures, and the big companies. OEMs came much later. Talking about India, I think Sir was mentioning about two-wheelers and the auto rickshaws, right? I would really like to quote Ather Energy, right? As much as I, don't agree on the scale factor, like you said, the cost. People value cost more than the product and the innovation. But I think Ather has done a really great job building a really good product, and that's very, very important, right? Cost comes later. At least for me as an engineer, as a product, person, I would value a product more than the cost, And I think that is where the OEM started coming in the race, because I remember 2 or 3 years back when the FAME policy was being pushed, right? So the government had asked all the two-wheeler OEMs to get into two-wheeler segment by 2020, right? So the OEMs didn't really have that kind of learning curve to enter the EV race, so they acquired them. So most of the EVs, companies in India, right? Two-wheelers, auto rickshaws, they got acquired by the bigger OEMs. And that's how the OEMs came into this picture, right? And same goes with the world. The bigger companies have been acquiring smaller companies into, which are into battery management systems, into any kind of chemistry of the battery or any powertrain system. So we have a lot of young startups coming across the globe who are building small tech, which is very, very valuable for the bigger players. And that's where the whole ecosystem is getting very diverse. And that's where it is also helping nurture the small startups. Because this is not a field where we need to build an application which is going to be scalable across the world. We're building some core tech, and that needs capital. Like, I'm very, very happy to say that like this year we saw some good capital going into some real innovation in India, right? In the satellite technology, in the rocket technologies, and the EVs also. So now the VCs are coming, now the bigger companies are coming, and instead of just going through the learning curve again, they're investing capital to help the startup, because they can deliver more in less time. So the learning curve is much fast. Yeah, I would say speed is still slow in India. Like a lot of young startups have to make a very strong decision that should they continue in India or not. And that's where the majority innovation goes to the European and the US countries. I think that's where the government or the bigger corporates have to take a stand and kind of build that ecosystem with the startups. They're doing a certain level, but I think more can be done.
So the startups are going to be one of the important stakeholders.
Yes. They are the drivers. They're the drivers. I mean, for every single innovation you talk about autonomous tech, we have it. But yeah, the ecosystem is still that it's not very strong in terms of nurturing them. I think that's where we kind of lack, because like you said, right, the business model in India, right, is very, very important. So in India, innovation, is only valuable if it has a viable business model. Else it's just not going to work out. Else you're just going to be an R&D project, right? So that's the truth.
If I may just add with a few comments here. Companies such as Ather, they do not look at EV as a replacement of an internal combustion engine. So they're not trying to offer you the same with a different engine, which is what the conventional OEMs are trying. Now, people don't see a motivation or incentive to change because they don't see what's under the hood on a daily basis. What the startups have managed to do is to create an appeal beyond electric drivetrain, and that is by providing additional features. If you look at the Ather dashboard for two-wheeler, it gives you Bluetooth connectivity, you can pair it with your Android phone, etc. And that appeals to a certain category of young users. So they are looking at EV, but this just pushes them in that direction a little further. So I think this is what Tesla has also managed to do, disruption. They did not come with any background. So they combined electric drivetrain with autonomous technology. And that's where they succeed. If they were just electric drivetrain manufacturer, they would not be able to compete with the global OEMs. Right? And I think this is where the disruption will also happen. So I count on startups. Also, I think startups will have a fantastic opportunity to disrupt what is conventionally a very closed industry. So I think EV and like you are in autonomous, I think autonomous and a combination of the two will bring in a disruption in this industry, I firmly believe, and they probably sometimes will take the lead in deploying these technologies.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. I think, thank you for the add-ons to that, Vinay. Akim, if we look at the COVID had a huge impact last, I think, 7 to 8 months. So there are new thoughts in the people about safety, moving from shared transport to more personalized transport. So, Akim, what I would like to ask you is, do you feel that COVID would also have impact in Germany when we talk about e-mobility market or the mobility market in Germany?
Yeah. I think, and I read a very good good article from an international consultant on that topic. COVID, no doubt about it, had impact on the consumer behavior.
Right.
So the personal security, staying away from the virus was, I think, the most important thing people were thinking on the day-to-day basis when they were commuting, which is one of the big things. Commuting either in India or in Germany is one of the big, transport questions, day-to-day transport questions. So we have seen, and there are quite a number of studies on that worldwide, that there is a clear shift which is connected to the pre-COVID habits, actually. So if somebody was mainly using the car and then perhaps shifted to the public transport, then this person will go back to the car. Then he's a single person in a single car and driving to his job. And the ones who were, inclined to take public transport, perhaps for also, we were talking about the mind change also in people's minds in terms of environment. They were changing to bikes or even walking to the office. So these are the three areas where we see an increase. Whereas for public transport, like metro, trains, or taxis and others, there's less usage because of the risk of getting COVID-19. So your question is also on the question: what will be in the post-COVID time?
Right.
Will that keep up, or will that change kind of a modal mix of transport? I think human beings are very behavioristic in terms of changing its own behavior is kind of a difficult thing to do. You took the car for the whole of life. Why should you change that idea after COVID? But I believe that the experience that these people did during that time is quite important. So I believe first that there will be a kind of a regain in the public transport system. So they will go back. The people who were in the public transport before, they will come back to the public transport. But there are solutions, and I think you were mentioning this was AV and e-mobility. I think AV and e-mobility, if you put that together, and you can do very good things. You can innovate on new ways of transport, safe ways of transport in order for commuting. And there are two other factors which I would like to mention. One factor is the price of fuel. If the price of fuel stays as low as it is now, and we were talking about price sensitivity of the people, then it's very difficult for the e-sector to get into the game. So I think that is something where also governments, can play a role. That is something where we can do something. And there is a second point where I think we have to look at, and this is a positive thing which comes from the COVID-19 area, home office. I think companies have changed their mindset quite dramatically in terms of accepting home office. I personally believe that as we are social beings, as human beings, that we need to meet on a regular basis. But I think there's also a big chunk of our work we can do from home. So there will be less commuting, there will be less transport needs. So I guess that the pandemic itself will have an impact on the working reality of all people worldwide. And it was interesting enough, I was talking to some of the companies here in Bengaluru, and they said, you know, we don't see a reduction in our productivity. We even see an increase in productivity by people working from home. There are very different environments in terms of, you know, working from home in India and working from home in Germany. You know, my ministry, for example, when somebody is working from home, you get delivered a table, you get delivered a good seat, you get delivered a nice computer and a lamp, and somebody is coming looking if everything is set up well, which a lot of people can't do here because they're living, you know, they're living far from home, they're living in small apartments, so working from home is quite difficult. So you see, it has its pros and its cons, but I think that will stay. Home office will be an important part and will reduce the number of people taking transport. And there are so many possibilities where e-mobility can get you know, a surplus for the consumer. And you said if there is an advantage for the consumer in using an e-mobile solution, might it be micro-mobile solutions, you know, for the last kilometer or whatever, I think that is where we should look at. You know, all these big questions in terms of you know, making e-mobility working with you know, with trucks and ships and cars, etc. That's another question. But for this day-to-day commuting and transport needs, I think E has to play a big role together with some other factors. So we governments, we have to look at what we can do in order to support this in terms of what is the financial you know, incentive for taking E solutions. And I think we can do something, and we should do something as governments. And I see that our governments are doing it. In Germany, we are doing. And here also, I think there are ideas of doing things. And the second one is just the reality of home office. Right. So yeah, definitely e-mobility will have a bigger share after COVID. That is my conviction.
Right. Thank you. Now, when we look at e-vehicles, actually they are disrupting the traditional automobile industry because we are going into more electronics parts rather than the mechanical parts. Now, what impact would this have on the labor market in India? Because servicing of e-vehicles is going to be quite different when we compare it with the IC engine vehicles. Like we are quite used to taking to the roadside mechanic and do some repair, but when we are talking about e-vehicles, they are much more complex. So would that have an impact on the labor market, especially the smaller outlets for servicing?
Yeah, I think it will have an impact for sure. But let's say if we start from the manufacturing of a car, I'm not too worried for the next 10, 20 years that we need less labor for doing this. The reason is all the panelists in the first round highlighted that software will dominate the car of the future. And I agree in terms of value, in terms of features, that is true. But at the same time, it's true that you will not drive to Mysore with software. Except you go virtually, then you can also celebrate Diwali virtually if you want that, but you still need a chassis, you need tires, you need brakes. Actually, only the motor and to some degree the gearbox are changing. So it's not that everything disappears. The second thing, if I look, let's say, on the figures or forecast for Europe for, let's say, the 2030, they would say it's around 15% electrical vehicles, 40% traditional combustion, and 45% hybrids, electric and petrol. Now, if you take this 45% hybrids, they take more manpower to assemble. It speaks for itself because it has a conventional system in it and an electromotor. So they need more manpower. So this less manpower you may need to manufacture e-vehicle will be compensated to some degree by that. That is for Europe. We have to see how this evolves in India, but I don't think it's just such a black and white kind of thing. So that will also help, I feel. Then the next point, what I would say, let's say the e-vehicles get more dominance. Then this will only work if you bring up the infrastructure. You need not 1,000 loading stations or 10,000, you need them in 100,000. Because if more people go for that, it will not help you if your charging station somewhere is totally blocked all the time. Then people get upset. So that alone will create enormous amount of employment to install these stations, to manufacture, to maintain, to do the service. So there is already, I think in Europe they say around 57% of the jobs you lose in manufacturing will be compensated by building infrastructure and other jobs which are coming out of this. And these are pretty safe jobs because you have to do the maintenance locally. You cannot do it in China or in somewhere else. It's a safe job if you take it from that angle. I think this labor question and social questions are very important in the future. Absolutely. And if we say, I mean, you know the statistics, 10 million young people per year we should employ, that is now not happening because a big interrupt to Corona, but we have to pick that up again. And it will be an enormous challenge. What you said for the roadside vallas and so on, as I said, the tire will be still there, so he can still do that business. And others, we need skilling programs. I think that can be done. It's like in anything else, if the political will is there, it's not that, let's say normally an electrical vehicle is more or less, it runs or not. You cannot easily repair electrical engine on the roadside. So, but they are, I would also assume they don't fail. And since I'm an electronic engineer, I know they don't fail. So there will be interruptions and changes, but I would like to close with a general remark. Let's say if as a society is able to do something more efficient, shorter, and you lose jobs by that. Still, if you see it from an overall perspective, it's a progress for that society. They create more wealth in a shorter time. So what happens out of this is more a social and a political question. How is this additional benefit distributed? If it goes only to a very few people, then you have social unrest. If we are able to balance this in a reasonable way, then any technical progress is wonderful. Maybe you work in the future instead of 8 hours, you can do the same in 6. Nobody would say, let's do it in 8 or 10. It's not a good thing. But if people lose jobs by this, then the society needs solutions for that. And we will find them. That is, again, needed. If we do that, everything will fall in place, I feel.
Now, I would like perhaps to just to comment on that. And again, there is government in the game. You know, if we look at structural change, and we do have that in Germany very strongly in the energy sector, you know, going away from the nuclear and the fossil fuel generated energy into sustainable energy, we are losing a lot of jobs in that classical field. But we put in a lot of money over the years because we now decide that by 2030, for example, all coal plants will be done. So we put in a lot of money now in order to shape the structural change and to bring jobs to the regions which before had been completely dependent on the coal mining, for example. So I think, as you said, I would like to echo that. Structural changes, they always have risks, and there will be some losers. That is also clear, but there will also a big number of winners in there in the game, and after all, it will balance out.
Absolutely. Even I think what will happen is we will have new skill sets coming in.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
the people would have to be skilled to have, I think, new understanding of the structural changes that would happen.
Rajesh, if I may just add
a
few bullets. If you see, there is no reason to sketch a doomsday scenario for skilling. We say in our company, a car will still remain a car. whether it's electric drivetrain or gasoline drivetrain. Like Hubert mentioned, your door trims, your tires, your braking system, HVAC, steering, all of them still remain. That car is not going to look very different from the conventional car. And that part of the car, which is nearly 40% of the cost of the car, the old car, will need maintenance, and that will still continue. Now, what electric drivetrain adds is just merely 12% of the cost of the car is replaced, which is the electronics. The battery takes the remaining 45% roughly, so that adds up to 100. And battery is a monolith that does not need maintenance, you just swap it. So yes, with respect to the engine, an engine maintenance, there is going to be a reskilling required for that community, which is in the manufacturing space, which is manipulating plastics, manipulating metal, alloys, castings, etc. That will have to go through a transformation, but I think those guys can be transferred to the motor industry. And they can be also re-skilled for the battery industry, because that will need to be built. So if you talk about the roadside technicians, I think a majority of the maintenance is non-engine oriented. So I think that will still continue. They will still have that opportunity. So I think there is no reason to do so, and government has this national skilling program. I think the industry and the government have to work together and provide a transition path to everyone who's affected. I think that's about it, and I think this is not going to happen overnight. It is a gradual process that gives enough time for people to be reskilled and repositioned.
I may also add to that is, besides the electric vehicle, other challenges will also come. Let's say if you go for more autonomous driving, maybe not fully autonomous, but the steps towards it may change the structure of a car in the future. Let's say if you reach a level where you have almost zero risk for an accident, then the car will not have a weight of 1.5 tons anymore. It will be 800 kilograms. Maybe the safety belt goes away because you may not need it anymore. This is maybe too far in the future, but if you take this autonomous driving seriously, what I do, in 5, 10, 15 years, maybe in steps, then the car will also change, not only the electrical one, and that will again be a huge challenge on the supplier industry. But people had these challenges in the past also, they will solve it. There will be new jobs coming up in the same way what you said. It will be a structural change, and the society has to be able to handle that. And I'm confident that it can be done.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
it's not something black and white.
Right. Vinay, let me come to one point earlier, what Hubert had mentioned about hybrid vehicles. So when we look at the Indian scenario, Vinay, we seem to have leapfrogged from the IC vehicles to the electric vehicles. So do you see that hybrid vehicles have a market in India and a potential in India?
I think let's look at it from the adoption of EV. The key question to ask is, will hybrid slow down the EV adoption? Because you're providing an intermediate path towards EV. I think for the market like India, where we are already very late on the hybrids. Toyota Prius tried to launch the Prius here, was expensive. I think they had to shut it down. Honda Civic launched a hybrid, again did not fly. They had to sell it at a massive discount later. So somehow past experiences, even though they were 5 years ago, launching hybrids in India have not been successful. And there is a reason, because again there is a cost element. But I think as a country, as an industry, we should now try to, like you said, leapfrog to EV, because that is a clear vision, and we are closer to reality from an economics perspective and technology and adoption perspective. So I would personally say, if I were offered a hybrid now, or within 2 years a practical EV, I would wait for the practical EV. And then that's very important. Let's not distract ourselves with an intermediate solution as a country. Not because it's not relevant. Many countries have benefited from the hybrid in terms of carbon footprint reduction with the start-stop, whether it's battery regenerative technology, braking regeneration technology, etc. I think now with EV you can bootstrap all of that, jump directly into get all the benefits. So why go through an intermediate solution? Because we are late, not because of the
Absolutely.
So I would say not.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Ranjan, coming to the last question, since you are from the startup domain, so what are the challenges the startups typically face when they want to scale up?
Right. So I think it depends a lot on the demographics also. I'll specifically talk about India. And since we're talking about the EV and mobility, two major ones. One is the capital, second is policy, right? And these are the two major hurdles which almost kill a startup in India. Because capital, you need to actually, you have to buy components, you have to buy hardware. And a lot of dependency is on the Chinese markets and the US markets, because we don't get components in India. Then comes to manufacturing, right? I think a lot of discussion has happened on why Tesla is not launching in India, because the ODMs in India are not complying to the quality standards of Tesla, right? So a lot of work has to go through in the ecosystem in terms of the manufacturing capabilities, the quality of the products, that the startups can start leveraging those. Until then, we have to go to China. Like in this whole COVID time, when the Chinese, there was some, disruption over there, we had a lot of delays in the shipments. So our products got delayed by that time, right? And these things cost a lot of money. So either the money has to come from a venture capital, or it has to come from some OEM, or I don't think so government directly funds like this, because we have bodies like SIDBI and a couple of other institutions to route the funds to VCs, but still they want to have ROI. And honestly, no one will predict an ROI, right? Honestly, mobility still, we can debate a lot that we're going in a good direction, but no one knows the complexity we're going to hit in the next 5 years, right? We're not talking enough about scrappage policy, right? We are talking a lot about lithium-ion batteries, but what happens after 10 years of cycle? Absolutely. Where do you scrap it, right? That's a huge, huge thing to be debated about, right? So money is a very, very crucial factor. We need capital to do real good innovation. Even if it is for a small scale, doesn't matter. Everything has a utility. That's the first point. Second point comes policy, right? When we start working on something, and I'll in fact quote on that, like in 2014, Mahindra started an event called Spark the Rise, which was for an autonomous car, right? My team was the finalist in the event, right? We were able to get a lot of good corporates across the world to sponsor us, get in-kind hardware and everything. But the moment I went to the market to raise capital from the VCs and the other institutions, right, the first question was business model. Second, when the ministry came, they said autonomous industry doesn't seem very viable because people will lose their jobs. I don't know what is skepticism around that. And they clearly stated, we are not going to support autonomous technology in the newspapers. Now imagine the VC sentiment, right? You're going to raise funds and they're like, your ministry doesn't allow that. What happens then? So then what happens is, once they realize that, okay, this is industry is going ahead, irrespective of whatnot, right? Then they come and say, okay, let's make a framework around that, right? And there are two good examples. One is, your cryptocurrency, and second is drones. Still, cryptocurrency is banned. That's a different thing, because government is still thinking on how it can leverage this. But for drones, ultimately they came together, they made a federation to regulate things because of privacy issues, a lot of other issues, right? Same in e-mobility also. The FAME policy was created around this to, fasten the adoption of the e-mobility, the charging infrastructure, the batteries, and a lot of things, right? So I think the policy is playing a very crucial role, but unfortunately, startups don't get enough visibility in the policy. Like, we don't get called for the policy meetings that, okay, come and give your thoughts. It's mostly the bigger players, right? And that's why I think there's a disconnect. And that's why I think, we have institutions like NASSCOM helping us to bridge the gap, right? But it needs to be more proactive. Like I said, I was very surprised to be a part of this panel, right? Being one of these companies. So I think we need this more. And there's a huge, bunch of good startups in India today. Like, I have so many companies approaching me from e-mobility, from autonomous tech. And, it's very sad to say that, I have to give them advice that, okay, guys, let's be realistic. You will not get money. So find the other way. Either you just find something else, right? So I think these two things have to be taken care of in a very, very realistic way to enable some good advancements. Because unless until we do that, a startup can only, then become a, a product for a OEM to acquire and then utilize that.
No, thank you for being so candid and frank, Ranjan, and wish you all the best. I think Vinay wanted to share a thought. Yeah.
I would also like to give the government credit, the policymakers. If you look at the recent announcement on the production linked incentive, I think the second version, there is a significant tens of billions of dollars of incentive for production in India. And the automotive industry gets a large chunk of it, and that we have seen. It's just an announcement of just, I think, a few days ago. Within the automotive segment, you see battery manufacturing, technology for batteries, chemistry for batteries, also has a large amount of incentive. It's the right step, because all that the government can enable is for everyone to succeed in the market. It cannot take sides. It has to focus, because you cannot dilute your resources across many areas. So I think that is a good step. Now, what I look forward to, if I had a wish list that people would ask me, it would not even be a list, it would just be one wish. I think if you look at the economics, 40% of the electric vehicle will continue to be a battery, the cost. And that's one technology. You don't need a myriad of technologies that requires parallel development. If somehow we can grapple with this technology, chemistry included, including hydrogen fuel cell based technology, why only lithium? There are alternate technologies being explored. Why can't we disrupt away from lithium, for example?
Absolutely.
So if we can manage that in the country and build an ecosystem for development and manufacturing. So whether you introduce the universities for chemistry research, which we are strong in, manufacturing using other materials, productizing it, and there's a significant cost. So there's a lot to gain for that industry. It's not a marginal industry anymore. I think this is where the industry, the universities, the research institutions and the governments have to get together. And then I think in just a matter of 5 years, we can revolutionize energy storage technology used in electric vehicles. And I think that would be my wish, that we can look back 5 years and say, we did that part very well. Yeah.
Well, I think I'll add one last point to this, right? Fantastically, ISRO has done a fantastic job in EV research, right? As a space altogether, but the work they've done for the payload in the last couple of launches, they have mandated that corporates should use that tech in the commercial vehicles also. And like Vinay said rightly, IIT Madras has been doing some amazing work in the chemistry part. And I think a lot of innovation can come from university. I think that was one of my major reasons of starting Autonomous Car project. I'll be very thankful to all the people who supported us. We have an autonomous car today with us. It's a running car. It's an autonomy level 2, not very mature enough, but still there is a car. Every year 50 to 60 odd students come, they work on that, and they are across the globe today working in the best companies, researching on the best projects. So that is the ecosystem was made. And that has to be now fostered and nurtured in the future.
And I would support that in terms of an international cooperation. We talked about Indo-German cooperation, and I think if you put together the ecosystems of Indian startups with the ecosystem of German startups, where we as a government, we support very much the battery side. Where there is a new institute being built in Germany just for the research on batteries. And I think we don't have to invent things twice. One time in India and one time in Germany. We just let's join together. Both environments have their positive sides and their different views on things, and then if we come together, I think that will be a good thing. So we do have this initiative like GINSAP and others, where we really support young entrepreneurs and young startups in order to get going together. So that would be my wish, that the Bangalore Tech Summit also brings these people together and foster that.
I would also support that. My experience when I was MD of EFD Induction is simply the same. If German engineers and Indian engineers work together and the atmosphere is good, the product you get out of that, it's better than only a German product and better than only an Indian product. The Germans may be a little stronger on hardware and traditional industries. The Indians classically are much better in mathematics. They are more innovative. They are not. In Germany, as an engineer, I take 20 things as given. The Indian engineer is much innovative. Indeed. So, and the German may say this is a nonsense, and then he may recognize it's not a nonsense. So if you bring harmony in these teams, they can really create fantastic products. And I think this is one of the purpose why we sit here to promote that.
Yep.
I think, and politically it's also fantastic because Germany is a democracy, India is a democracy. That is not the only point, but also a point, because there are not so many democracies in this region.
Right. I think that sums it up very well, friends, and I would like to conclude the discussions, and I would just like to sum up some of the points that have been raised, then I would hand it over to our Consul General for the last words. So I would like to thank our Consul General as well as our esteemed and knowledgeable panelists for sharing their experience and insights in this interesting and relevant topic of e-mobility. EVs are undoubtedly the way forward for the sustainable mobility and is increasingly gaining traction across the world. In India, the charge is being led by the two-wheelers and the three-wheeler segment, as we heard from our panelists also, followed by the public transport and non-public passenger fleet. However, one of the biggest hurdles that India faces is our limited ecosystem for EVs presently. Significant number of critical components still need to be imported. However, the industry and government are proactively working to address these constraints and are taking steps in the right direction. Several leading states have released EV policies with clear focus of driving increased adoption through both demand and supply-led incentives. Subsidies are being linked to higher level of localization to promote Make in India and establish a strong EV ecosystem in India. India has already achieved global excellence in automotive industry and is a major exporter of vehicles and critical components globally. With the right focus, collaborative approach by all stakeholders, and a pragmatic policy, we can help drive clean mobility and be the forefront in this transition from fossil fuels to an energy-friendly system. So on behalf of the German Engineering Federation, VDMA, I would like to thank Karnataka government for successfully organizing this Bangalore Tech Summit. And this time we are having it on the virtual platform. I would like to thank all our participants, all our panelists, participants who have joined this interaction. And I would now like to request our Consul General to conclude the session.
Thank you very much, Rajesh. I only can echo what you said in terms of thanks. I won't repeat all of that. I think the Bangalore Tech Summit 2020, even if it's virtual, is a very wonderful platform in order to discuss these kind of topics. And I must admit, I have learned so many things today during that discussion, and I hope that you, our listeners and viewers, have also learned a lot on e-mobility, its future, the ideas which are behind, and the ways how we can shape our common future in e-mobility. So thank you for watching, thank you for listening, thank you VDMA, because you didn't include this thanks in your little speech. Thank you VDMA for heading that discussion, and yourself also. So I only can conclude by asking all of you, please stay safe, and thank you for watching and listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.